best definition of activism? What would you say is your best definition of activism, whether it's an original or a adopted idea?
Definitely adopted, because I don't think it's anything what it used to be. So for me, activism, whether it be an individual or a collective, it's just those who are impassionate and feel powerful about a cause that affects them. And they're going up against people that are the lawmakers, the decision makers, and wanting to invoke change. And some people do it in a way of inspiring. Some people do it with force. But I think that for me, activism, especially now that everybody's got like a camera in their pocket, it's now got seasons. I think you just see peaks and valleys of activism, and it's down to when something inflammatory comes up and it does then invoke the masses to go out and to protest on the streets for most. But for me, activism is the other part of the peaks and valleys, is actually the baseline, the one that stays solid and straight and strong, and is almost like a heartbeat, that it's somebody who is in the background and it's a daily existence for them. It's not peaks and valleys. It's not, okay, when I remember or when I see a new face to a campaign, or it's when it's your everyday and you're trying to make a change. And for me, I've never been an individual that is comfortable with crowds anyway. So the fact of going to the streets and campaigning is not for me. Yeah. But you can campaign in different ways. It can be in a smaller, more impactful manner, where I know that I'm the eldest grandchild, so my campaign is usually done around a kitchen table, and I'm talking to my baby cousins and trying to teach them how to be safe, trying to teach them how they can, change opinions of where they work and how to continue fighting kind of stereotypes or whatever their grievance could be. The main grievance in my household that I always make sure is just never going to happen to my siblings is pay. We talk money like we talk about the weather. Like, I want to know what you're on, find out from your allies at work what they're on, make sure there is no gap. If there's a gap, what were you going to do about it? How do you bring up pay in an interview? So there's small little bits of activism you can do. And I feel like having those talks on a Sunday around a kitchen table is as strong as being out in the streets. Now, those people out in the streets are so important, because you need that exposure and that wake-up call, because it can actually help those who are negotiating for us behind the doors that we don't even know about. 100%. So for me, it's so complex now, activism, that it's not just one thing. And I don't think you should shun one side of it to the other. You need to have those at the front. You need to have those in the middle. It's like an organization. If you look at it as an organization, you have your people at the front, that's your salespeople, that's pitching what needs to happen and are talking about it. But then you've got those in marketing who know what that message should somewhat be and what the slogan should be. But then the slogan shouldn't be a slogan. You have to make sure it's a movement. So then you need the people at the back that's in the planning and the planning and kind of understanding the strategies needed to make those changes, because noise without direction is noise, where it could then be like a symphony of change if you do it correctly. And that's what I think activism is. So
yeah. What a lovely analogy to kind of refer to an organisation. And I think that does a lot to kind of give a sort of visual idea or visual aid of just how comprehensive activism needs to be, and that it shouldn't be sort of viewed in a singular dimension.
No,
that's really, really useful, actually. And yeah, I've never heard anyone refer to it like that, but I think that's really helpful in terms of bringing it into today, and helping those who may feel far removed from it to feel a bit closer to it.
So when it comes to just like, when I obviously previously, for me, understanding it in a different point of view, when I was a retailer, the company that I worked for, they had a campaign to save the bees. And so with that, they obviously had a product that had honey in it, but every time a customer purchased it, money went back to the organization to save the bees.
Yeah.
Now, those small moments of activism, it could be the fact that you are going to buy a hand cream, but you're going to choose to buy that one. So again, it doesn't always have to be that you're out there, on the front line. It could be as simple as a company deciding to take part of their profit and give it to an organization that is fighting that good battle. And it's also down to the customer that they are participating in that by buying that product, knowing the story behind it and why behind it. Because, the company I worked for had another 5 hand creams, but they chose that one and that became the number 1 hand cream for that purpose,
Which goes further to actually just further demonstrate or illustrate your point that everyone has access to participate in this.
Yeah.
In your example, you've got the consumer, you've got the charity that is actually leading the campaign, you've got the organisation that buy in, and then you've got the consumer. So it sounds like a complete circuit.
Yeah, it's multifaceted, and it's not taken for granted any person's role. Yeah, every role is important. And it's not just the loudest roles. It's not just the most publicized roles. There's so much happening behind the scenes that people sometimes are not aware of. Yeah, but it is a collective movement. That's what it usually has to be, in my opinion, for it to be productive. Absolutely.
We're only ever as powerful as the sum total of our parts. So very, very powerful. And I think I just love what you say in terms of recognizing that activism doesn't need to be the one that's shouting the loudest. Activism must actually be part of your everyday, because it's inevitably about being conscious of the world around you and thinking, how can I improve it? How can I actually make an impact? So that's fantastic. And to what extent would you say your life so far has been guided by this ideal or the concept that you've defined of activism in a conscious way or in an unconscious way?
I can tell you both, actually. So unconsciously, when I was probably in my 20s, I was quite a young manager when I came into retail, kind of got thrust upon that quite quickly and was in charge of quite a huge team. But when you kind of inherit a team, there's usually some kind of HR conversation that happens where they tell you who are your top performers, who are in need of support, and then those who they actually would like to manage out of the business in some form or fashion if they're on the last warning, so to speak, or something like that. Being the manager that I am and my style, I've never thought that there is problematic staff members. I just always thought that there are ones that are misunderstood. Yeah. So I realized when I got older that my acts of daily activism was not really listening to what the bigger picture, which is the corporate, whoever I was employed by wanted me to do. Is more that I had a responsibility to my own integrity of fairness and wanted to be fair to that individual. Yeah. So I would find out what makes that person passionate. So just giving an example, I had a member of staff that was deemed to them to be problematic, but she was just an artist. So I gave her the opportunity to do the art for our daily displays. And then when customers would come in and comment on how well the display was and the art that was, drew them in, she'd get a compliment from that helped her. She sold more. It just was a win-win. But again, I didn't think what they wanted me to do was right, so I didn't do it. But then my daily activism at that point was my proof in the pudding. So I actively worked with her to find out what inspires her to get up in the morning and to just generally to be happier, which made her happier at work. Mm-hmm. And then when I turned around her performance, it was a bit of a stick it to them, really, that you just didn't have a good enough manager previously. It's nothing to do with the young lady. So that to me was when I was unconscious of what I was doing then. And I just thought that was me being what my mum would probably, before I'd be just called a rebel. But it was actually just realizing what's wrong is wrong and what's right is right. in how I deem that character, that criteria.
Yeah.
And now consciously, it's the same thing. Now I've got a very firm ready to hit my, the fourth floor. In my age, I now know myself really well. I know what I think is wrong and what I think is right.
Yeah.
And so consciously, I choose to find solutions. And again, I'm not the loudest in my, community, but to be fair, when I'm at my most quietest is when I'm actually doing my best work. So that's when I'm thinking of the solution to counteract whatever problem we have. To be fair, I've never really been a person that looks to government or decision makers or any type of authority as someone that can dictate what I want to do or not do. Obviously within crime, I'd never do crime, but when it comes to needing things from them, I'm quite self-sufficient, and that's something I want to share and for my children to adopt and for my culture to adopt. It's just not in me to keep on asking for something that I don't think will come unless we change our current circumstances.
Yeah.
So that's how I kind of see it at the moment. For me, is just your activism is daily in your small decisions, but consciously I know what's right and wrong, and I will do my own actions within my own life to counteract that. Yeah.
And I think what you say there, especially about the example of your member of staff, your team member at the time, is such a compelling and beautiful example. Again, what I like about the way that you've responded so far is that it's always about humanizing and also about responsibility, and compassion, and us actually being accountable not only to ourselves, but to our fellow man. How important do you feel activism is to the nation building agenda of specifically our community as a Black people? And we can talk, geographically here in the UK, but more in the wider context of us, the global nation.
So for me, activism in our community, and just like you said, it being global and domestic, I think it's actually communication, because I think we're bombarded with so much triggering media that it's sometimes hard to process what's right, what's wrong, what has been addressed, and then what has been actioned. Have we got justice for this? And so sometimes the information is been diluted so much that you could have been completely devastated by something that you've watched or read, and when you try to find out how it's been concluded, it's hard to find. So for me, I think that what's important when it comes to how we conduct our campaigning in our culture is to communicate clearly amongst all of us, and I think everywhere, that it should be linked together so that we understand what's happening. Because I think that sometimes when I've spoken to friends and family in the States, when I've spoken to friends and family in the Caribbean, friends in Ghana, it's very interesting how disconnected those cultures are to us. And so sometimes they don't understand what we're going through, because we seem to adopt a lot of their pain.
That's right.
And I don't always feel like that is reciprocated.
Yeah.
So I could probably name a lot of people, a lot of individuals that lost their life for, towards police brutality in the States. Could they do the same for us in the UK? So for me, I feel like what needs to happen is campaigning within ourselves to have more understanding of what our journey is as Black British, because we understand their history and I don't think they know ours. And I think once we have education throughout all of the African diaspora across the world, there'd be more ways of finding solutions together. Because do you know what it is? This is how this is a weird one again. When I was at college, my best friend that I'm best friends with today, we had a moment where I went through, my day to day, and I was just always the only Black person there. And there was just this one day in the cafeteria, I saw him. Oh my God, a Black person, and that feeling, and that thing is, all of us we've had that at some point. It's when you've gone on a road trip to, the very edge of the UK, and you play in the car or with the kids, spot the Black person. But then when you get to that beach together, or if you're in a restaurant together, you gravitate to that other Black family or Black person, and you have this moment. You become like friends at that point. That situation and that environment would not have taken place between myself and my best friend if that room was filled with Black people. Would we have ever met? No, because we would have not been in a discomfort looking for comfort. So that feeling of wanting to be close to that person, and I wanted to be close to him and vice versa, because we were, like I said, was in an uncomfortable place, and we wanted that solidarity with each other. If we was to hold on to that feeling, even in a crowded room of other Black people, and we all did that, we'd be able to find a way of understanding that our comfort is within ourselves, and we could be more united. Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense, but I hold on to that feeling. I remember that day like it was yesterday, how I felt when I was in that building. It was, I didn't like studying there, but he made it better. And I think what we all know is that feeling that we have when we're alone. We all have the same feelings all the time. And I find it interesting that if we all have the same feelings all the time, we all have the same trauma all the time, we have to use that same feeling to have positive outcomes and not just reflect on the negative ones.
That's very important, very important. And I'd even go as far as to say that feeling is a sense of belonging. And from a sense of belonging comes an identity. And I think that identity really, that does need to be where we root ourselves, and what has been absent, to have that clear collective identity. That's not to say that there won't be differences, but there must be a central location where we all agree upon as a common identity. And as you say, it then allows us to build, to work together, to cooperate in a way that is beneficial for the group. So absolutely makes sense.
And it's also that kind of one thing I find interesting when you think about racism in parts of that separates us in a sense of us as a Black community, is that it reminds me of having a loss in the family. So when you have a loss in the family, it turns into, as well in my family it turned into almost like a competition of who is hurting more. Like, no, that was my brother, I should hurt more. No, that was my dad, I should hurt more. And, oh, you don't understand, I worked with him every day, so I saw him more hours than you did. So there's this, I see a parity, a parallel between that feeling that people have during grief to the same feeling we have with racism as a nation. UK, my cousins have said to me from the States that you ain't got it like we got it. And it's what my sister-in-law refers to as Oppression Olympics. I like that. And that is that's one of our blocks. That's one of the tools that is used against us, because that stops our unity. That stops the forward progression.
Massively. So why do you think the word activism has received a bad press historically? And I would even go further to say, even in contemporary society as well, the word activism just seems to have this way of rubbing people up the wrong way?
Well, historically, let's be frank, because mainly the reason why people protest and there's levels of activism is because there's passion behind it. And you've heard things like crimes of passion. All those things sometimes equate to violence. And it's that pain of wanting to be heard over everybody else. It's that also sometimes entitlement of wanting to be heard over everybody else. And so there has been times where there's activism, there's always people that are there for the peaceful element of it and a peaceful protest. But there are those 1%ers that are in there. Some people argue that they've been placed there, but there's people in there that are just that 1%ers that would love to see the world burn. They're there for the hate. They're not there for the love of the cause. It's not there for, I'm a woman, I want to be heard, or, you know, I'm Black and I would like to be heard, or, you know, I want freedom for this or that. Some of them are there for the sheer hate of a cause, of the opposition. So they're there for the hate of the opposition. And with that hate and that passion is sometimes a dangerous cocktail that turns into violence. And then people go a bit, you know, lose their senses. But in the modern day as well, I feel that with technology, people can spout very hateful things and hide behind the fact that it's for a cause. And so the danger is, and there's like so many documentaries about how algorithms work, that people can be putting out these unsolicited opinions and they're not being kind of maintained or governed or checked, you know, to make sure that they're safe to be distributed out to all different ages. So you can then incite real problems when you do that, and riots and things like that. So I think activism now are the same people, but they've got different platforms and different devices to do what they did previously. So those who before would throw a brick from, you know, in the 80s, all of a sudden now they're just throwing bricks from behind, you know, with their thumbs on social media, but still doing the same thing because it's the intent behind it. So those people are what's given activism and made it a dirty word because of the intentions that they have. And sometimes it's just the way it is. Always the few ruin it for the majority. But that to me is where it all stems from, because that's one reason why I'm quite cautious of going to things like that and showing my support, because I don't always feel like it will be a safe place. And then how it's, you know, then also depending on, you know, what the campaign could be about and the protest could be about, you're not safe because the way you may look. That's also down to authorities, how it's handled, how it's then. Sometimes I'm concerned of how the media will spin it. You just need to look at 1% of the crowd that's acting a fool and, you know, record that, and then you make the other 99 look like who were peaceful, that didn't happen and it didn't exist. And so, you know, sometimes when you're not in control of your narrative, that to me is also another reason why terrorism, the activism and terrorism is just so close together in people's minds.
And I think your sort of final point there, for me, I was actually going to ask you how you felt about the role that the media plays in this, because I think that is very significant in terms of how our understanding of activism is framed. Like you say, so many of us aren't even there, but the only real opportunity for us to sort of ostensibly understand or be given, you know, an interpretation of what activism is through the conduit of the media. So a lot of us don't even come within, 100 miles of a protest.
No.
But our understanding is wholly and completely shaped by the media, whether that be social media or the more conventional mainstream media. So I think that, I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to sort of add on from there.
Yeah, the thing is, for me, media right now is so dangerous, because I think gone are the days when it was unbiased. Now it feels like most stories have an agenda. And you can see that when you just, do cross references of the same story with someone who's black to someone who's white. You see it all the time. So I'm in a place where I don't trust what the media says. I take everything with not even a pinch of salt, with the salt of the ocean. I don't really fully get behind what they say, because it is bias. It just is. There's just no other way to get around it. And for me, it was even just seeing how certain movements that have gotten more traction than others, when the time frame of their journeys are completely different by decades, centuries, some of them, So for me, seeing how what is being given more priority than the other is also 100% proof of the fact that it could be bought. And the way I look at it, any media outlet is a business, and considering business is something I know very, very well, you always look at your bottom line, and so you're always going to pander and protect where your money comes from. That's just how business works. And which is why we used to hold the BBC to a higher standard, because they weren't paid by advertising bills to have a level of bias. They were paid by the people. But it's another outlet that I personally feel are biased, regardless of who pays them.
The media is a form of state apparatus. So what is its function, I suppose, is one question that we must always ask ourselves when the media is actually feeding us, because it is a feed. We're being fed. So we inevitably have to question and ask ourselves, what is it that we're being fed and why? I think when we have our frame of reference informed by these organisations that are part of the state, or at least form a nexus with the state, it naturally must inherently seek to preserve the status quo.
Of course.
So that for me is always something that forces me to sort of naturally be on guard and question everything that's coming at me from the TV or the laptop or the phone now. So yeah, completely, I'm with you. So what do you feel is one simple form of activism that we should all be engaged in regularly? Given your definition, which I think is wonderful, clearly we don't have to be at the sort of picket lines, rather, with a placard. So what do you think is a simple form of activism that we can do within our community?
I think because it is, I would say see it as a full organization. The simple bits of activism you can do is to support, is to find out where to put your trust and your support in. And I know they were bombarded by loads of different information these days, and false information, or bias information. It's the case of seeking out those people in your community that want to do good and supporting them. But then it's also about re-educating the next generation. And actually generation up, because some of it is also our elders have their own traumas, and so sometimes they don't understand a new solution that could be put in front of them, or they don't even understand what's happened to them when they're, I have to admit, there's a point when I told my mum to before she sends anything forwards any kind of WhatsApps that had something about watch out for this, or watch out for that, or this is that, and all these kind of threads that would come to her. And again, it's a feeding of paranoia and feeding of information that all it's doing is further helping somebody else's agenda. And it's not about just forwarding on more fear and more propaganda. It's more about looking at those things. You can talk about them and say, goodness, I got this today, and expressing and dissecting what it is. But when you just send something to somebody out of context, or even knowing what they're going through at home themselves, can be too much. Not everyone can be not everyone can be an activist, because there are people in our society, in our community, that need to be protected. There's some people that have mental health issues that can't be out doing what I could do, because I need to protect them. There are some people that they could be having their own turmoil at home, and they're trying to get out of their own situation. They're trying to muster their own strength for their own problems, and we're now piling more problems onto them by thinking that we're being activists by sharing more and more that comes to us, and feeding them, and we could be harming that person more than helping them. I think it's about put down the device and start talking again. I remember growing up when my gran lived where we lived in Sudbury. We just used to talk over. My gran just used to talk over the fence, and that's how she would. That's how news was told. That's how what's happening with this person down the road. She needs our help, and we've lost community. And I think that's where we need to bring it back and understand that the day-to-day is the small micro movements of activism, helping one another, making sure each other's okay. There's no point in everybody having their head in the sand, granted, but not having individual success and not coming together to help and share and grow. That's what I love.
Yeah, and your point about essentially, if I was to sort of paraphrase, it's almost to say that with activism comes responsibility. Yes. With great power comes great responsibility. Yeah. As they say in the sort of comic strips, but it's so true. And I think again we almost come full circle to say that your expression of activism is not going to be somebody else's expression of activism.
No,
but it's to respect that the actual wills that turn the revolution, that bring about the revolution, has many spokes. Mm-hmm. Those spokes are equally one as important as the other. To keep that wheel moving in the way that it's able to. I wanted to kind of get a sense of where you feel that we can sustain our commitment to activism. How do we avoid getting derailed? How have you managed to maintain your resolve, maintain your focus, and to sustain what you started 2 years ago now?
So for me, the first part of my journey, and it was actually a little bit before COVID and unfortunately the murder of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. But for me, I had to detox away from mainstream media.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to. I found it toxic. I needed to I just found it toxic. Everything you saw was a twisted version of a truth, or it was the same repetitive narrative of bringing up the person's background and trying to justify what they done. So for me, I kind of look to find organizations that are positive and are looking for positive change and are doing it in a structured manner. Coming from a corporate background, even though now I'm definitely an entrepreneur and I don't want to go back to that kind of life, I still believe in structure when it comes to how we move forward and collectively. But the main thing I believe in is an ecosystem, and I like to study other cultures that have cultivated their own ecosystem and see how it works, pick it apart, and want to find a way to replicate it for our community. So when I found AdPack, I kept my eye firmly on them and was watching what Dina Kai was doing, because it's exactly what he wants to create. He wants to create an organization that understands the economic, interest that we need to start building, socially, the structure that we need. I don't think we can be a part of any real conversation of change until we shrink to an ecosystem, come back behind the walls of something that is singular, and then come back to a table more powerful than when we left. And all the things that we want to do, and I think that's the difference with us with other cultures, is we don't have any capital, in the sense of there is no way to bring all our capital together. And I know we've got great influential people that's at the top of the community, and they fight, again, lobbying and organizing with different organizations in government and out, and our own, community leaders, but we don't have the financial power to be feared slightly. I don't think what happened, the Windrush generation, what happened with that would have happened if we had money behind us as a community. I think they would have thought twice. So for me, when I sat back and I wanted to find a solution, I obviously came up with the Black Card Lottery.
Yeah.
And it was with the firm idea in my head that eventually, when I felt that I was ready, I was going to contact Dino Kai. That was always the goal. So when I just knew that what he wants to do is amazing. We need an ecosystem. We need someone who's looking at every single part of our economy, looking for economic, education, employment, health, housing, justice, politics, trade, in everything, like agriculture, all the things that we do not seem to be able to bring together and in-source from. He's trying to make an in-source ecosystem, and I'm all here for it. And what going back to even the first point I even made, not everyone's an activist, but that's the reason why lotteries were created. There's going to be a point when, as a head of state, you do have taxes, but there's going to be a point when you can't tax your people any more than you already are. That's when societies create lotteries to still do funding, but doing funding in people that don't care. So if you don't care, you will still join the lottery because you care about the prize. But the whole point is we want to have people that care about the causes. That's why it has to have a legal element of having given to a cause. So it's people that care. You'll get both people. The people that do not care and are not activists every day, but seasonally. But then you'll have those who, like I said, are your baseline activists that care every single day, can also feed into it. And it's about having a pot to have capital to then have fundamental changes in society. But like I said, organizations like AdPack are the ones to carry on the vision.
Absolutely.
So that's how I look at it.
No,
being a bit biased, obviously, being the founder of it, but the thing is, but that's the thing. If there was a lottery that was already built for my community, I would already be number one player.
Yeah,
I would have like signed me up straight away.
Yeah,
because I understand that we just don't have a system. that allows us to crowdfund like this.
And I think that word that you use, understand, is fundamental. You know, that is the operative word, in that a lot of people, unfortunately, because of the sort of society that we find ourselves in, a lot of people really don't even have the patience or the time to want to understand. And you know, they find themselves overwhelmed with the amount of information, with the amount of responsibility that they have on a personal level. They just don't really want to take the time to understand that if they were to just pause for a minute and reflect and critically think, that there could actually be a way out of the trap that they currently find themselves in. You know, so I think what you're doing is phenomenal, and part of our role at the Black Male Society is to actually encourage people to just pause and critically reflect on why they find themselves constantly on this hamster wheel, unable to really get off and really become masters of their own destiny, you know, instead of actually being part of the masses who are unfortunately at the disposal of the taskmasters, you know. So, I think it's a very important point to reflect on hugely. And I think what you say about the economics is absolutely fundamental, because once we actually have that economic floor in place, you know, it then allows us, you know, that platform upon which we then are able, you know, to then sort of propel ourselves into the various other areas of society, to be influential, to really come into our own when it comes to self-determining and ownership, which is where the power comes from, you know. And once we are in a position of power and influence, then I think that the struggle that we as a community face will look a lot different to the struggle that we've been attempting to overcome for so many years, you know.
Definitely.
So,
definitely.
Right. The last question is less a question and more a request to complete the statement. My activism is inspired by.
My activism is inspired by, I would say, love.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably what most people's are, but misguided. But for me personally, I'm a mother. I think about my kids. I think about, it's almost when you have that first conversation with a solicitor when you're thinking about your legacy that you're going to leave to your kids and make sure they're okay when you're gone, and having that conversation of who you want to look after them. But one thing we don't think about as well is, what do we want them to continue living in? And so, and how will that, what would that world look like? And so for me, when I do go out and I, you know, defy something that I think is wrong, and I move how I feel is correct in my morals and my compass of good and bad, is based on love. I don't ever act in hate. I don't ever act in fear. When I do something sheerly out of the love of it. I love being a woman. I think we're amazing. I love being Black. I love being a mother. You know, and so, but the same love that I have has me, you know, fight for what I believe fiercely, but never with violence in mind.
Yeah.
And I feel that some people, they also are activists because they love, but their love is tainted by the fact they have fear in them, and they don't have understanding or compassion. I can love my God and I can appreciate yours. Yeah. I can love, you know, my beliefs and still understand yours. And I can love my culture, because goodness knows I do. And I can still appreciate so much beauty in yours as well. Yeah. That's the whole reason why I do look at other cultures, and I love how they handle certain situations, or I like the accomplishments they've achieved. Yeah. But everything I do is out of love for it. If I don't love it, I probably won't care about it. Yeah. It won't be important to me.
No, I think that's a really, really lovely note to end on. That's such a important and powerful, very powerful note to end on, especially because you, in that response, take the time to look at it from the other side. You know, because like you said, there are those who are activists, who are activists in fear. You know? And so that manifests very, very differently to when you are operating in love. What fear breeds is hate. And obviously hate is the opposite end of that same continuum.
Exactly. You know? And that's why it's such a thin line. People don't know when they've crossed it. Absolutely. Because I can still love another individual and be in odds with them and disagree with them. But we can sit down and discuss it, and we can. I have to, the phrase "agree to disagree" is, I agree with it, and there's points of
Jay-Z.
Yeah, and you know, I can agree with it, and I can see a problem with it, because there are some things that are just right and wrong. Yeah, and if you are a person that is so on the opposite of something I feel is about safety, or is about that could be seen as hatred, that would be someone that I would try to keep within my world and my life. But it would be with the understanding that, and very clear understanding that we see this very differently. And we will circle around to this again. Because, you know, but you can, you know, because there are some.
We're going to boomerang on this one.
We're going to boomerang on it, because I, you know, there are some things that are just wrong in the world, and you can't pretend and bury your head in the sand that it's any indifferent. It's indifferent. It's not. So for me, it's the case of, I will love my way through a situation. I will try and understand my way through a situation. But I'm fully aware, and that's why my understanding of when somebody is fearful, that they're at the most dangerous. And if they feel like the fear is also the idea of that they're losing control of something that they think is dear, they're capable of doing anything. So so there is a level of understanding that I have for that, but again, that comes with just living it. Really, when you've been around somebody that you literally can see in their eyes that they are scared, I have empathy for them, and I want to explain to them that there is nothing to be scared of. But that takes that's not always my responsibility, though, to be fair, to educate, but I'm fully aware of it, and that's why I will sometimes choose to retreat to a point where I educate those who could be in danger of that person's fear, if that makes sense.
Yeah. There's, you know, which is to say that there's always something that can be done. Maybe not necessarily with the person experiencing the fear, but there is something that can be done to perhaps protect or safeguard those around you, you know, which is very, very noble, very important, and very much about, again, demonstrating the best in humanity. So, yeah, it's wonderful. This has been a really, really warm conversation, very thought-provoking and very, very pleasant, just enjoyable, you know. Enjoyable.
Thank you.
Yeah, so really, really lovely to reflect and reason through the questions with you. So thank you very much.
Oh, my absolute pleasure.